أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه العبد المؤيد والرسول المسدد حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة ويا عبرة كل مؤمن ومؤمنة، يا مظلوم يا غريب يا شهيد كربلاء، يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. A second for the love of Imams al-Hassan wal-Husain. A third for the love of Fatima al-Zahra with your loudest voices. We live at a time in which there are many schools of thought, there are many opinions, there are many theories that exist outside of Islam and inside of Islam. In fact, within every single school of thought in Islam, there's a school of thought within a school of thought. These schools of thought are apparent. They exist. They're active. You see them on satellite channels. You see them online, on YouTube, on social networks. They're present. And they call others to their way, to their schools of thought. All of these schools of thought are active, and they're drawing audiences. They're drawing supporters and followers to their agendas and to their way of thinking. Now, some of these schools of thought are extremely intelligent. Their content is of quality. They have their ideology is supported by logic, by reason, by sound proof and evidence. And there are some that are very poor in their content. Their school of thought is empty of reason and logic and evidence. It's only chaos. It's only a bunch of shouting and speaking loudly. But when you come to the content, you see that it's empty. And there are some that are in between these two. Their way of preaching, their styles of preaching also varies from one school of thought to another. You see that there are some schools of thought, there are some of those who hold opinions and theories. They're extremely outspoken, they're very eloquent, they know how to get their point across, extremely intelligent. And their way of preaching is extremely beautiful, to the point that the other side, the listener, as soon as he listens, it makes sense to him. He's convinced. He doesn't need any more arguments. He's immediately convinced. While there are others who their style of preaching is extremely rough, it's aggressive, it's associated with shouting and cursing and defaming and swearing. And what's interesting is sometimes you see a school of thought, you see a person, a scholar, a speaker. This person might have great content and he might be on the right path. Yet his style of preaching, his method is the wrong method. Perhaps he's on the right path and the things that he preaches about is correct. But his style, the way he preaches, the way he puts his material for people to listen to, it's in a bad way. It's with bad manners. While you will find someone else who is empty of content. He might be on the wrong path, yet he has a way of getting his point across. His style of preaching is perfect. He uses the right means of preaching. You will see that this person has more followers. A person who's on the right path, a person who is on the right path, but does not know how to sell his product, will lose his followers. And a person who might be empty of content, yet knows how to sell his product, knows how to speak, knows how to advertise for his ideas and theories and opinions, will have followers. Thus, this teaches us a major lesson that if you have content, if you have an idea, if you have an opinion, if you have an ideology, just because your ideology is strong, it doesn't mean that others will buy it. It doesn't mean that others will also follow it. What also matters is how you sell your product, how you sell your theory and opinion. Just by coming on TV or on social networks or coming online, you have a theory, you have an opinion. How are you getting your point across? By shouting and yelling, or by soundproof? By convincing arguments? How? The style of preaching has an enormous effect on how effective and influential you will be on others. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We come to the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt. We, the followers of Ahlul Bayt, we have an obligation. We have an obligation to preach about Islam and to preach about the genuine and authentic teachings of Ahlul Bayt. Have we done them service? How have we preached about Ahlul Bayt to others? What sort of image have we given followers of other schools of thought? What sort of image have we given them about Ahlul Bayt and about the teachings of Ahlul Bayt and about the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt? Is it by cursing and yelling, or is it by intelligent proof? Is it by using good manners? What is it that we're doing? How are we preaching? What is our style of preaching? Whether, you see, our preaching could be with three groups. Number one, outsiders from religion, Christians and Jews. How are we calling them to religion? How are we calling them to Islam? Is it by condemning them to hell and telling them that if they don't follow Islam, they will all end up in hellfire, and that what they believe in is ridiculous? By ridiculing them, how is it that we're calling them? What is our means of approaching them and preaching to them? This is one group. A second group is within Islam. We followers of Ahlul Bayt. When we argue with those who do not agree with us, those who follow other schools of thought, how are we arguing with them? Are we shouting at them and screaming at them and yelling at them? Are we condemning their figures, their religious figures? Or do we have a lenient way of speaking with them? How is it? Number three, our own people that disagree with us from our own school of thought. Don't we have difference of opinion? Don't we have many that disagree within our own school of thought? How do we disagree with them? Do we condemn them as well? There are some not only condemn Christians and Jews and those from others schools of thought within Islam, they condemn some that are in their own school of thought. They condemn them, they insult them, they humiliate them. What is our way of preaching? What is the style that we've picked up? This is very important, my dear friends. Because this will have, at the end of the day, a major influence on how many people we're trying to influence. How many people are we drawing to our school of thought, to our Islam, to our Ahlul Bayt? It will have an effect. How are you calling them? How are you making your school of thought attractive? Are you making it attractive? Are you making it unattractive? It depends on our actions. We have to come to the Quran. And we have to see what does the Quran say? The Quran tells us to call others to our path and to our faith and to our Islam and to our school of thought. But how? Let's examine and see what Islam tells us about preaching and the styles of preaching. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The Quran says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. This verse mentions three ways of preaching people to Islam, gathering people, calling people to Islam. Number one, al-hikmah, through wisdom. Call people with wisdom. Scholars here say wisdom means appealing to people's intellect, appealing to people's minds through sound proof, through evidence. Today, it's not enough making allegations and claiming things. No, you're claiming. Even if you're on the correct path. Right now, if we were to stand and call people to the path of Ahlul Bayt and to tell them that Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam was the first Khalifa after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. You see, there are some that accept that Amir al-Mu'mineen was a Khalifa for Rasulullah. But what we press on, what we argue on, is that he was the first, not the fourth. We'll come and argue. But just by shouting and saying and yelling and screaming that Ali ibn Abi Talib should have been the first Khalifa, This won't prove anything. Where's your proof? Where's our proof? Where's our evidence? And don't tell me you have a hadith from Al-Kafi or Bihar al-Anwar or our books. If you want to convince the other side, you have to bring evidence from something that they accept. Something that they accept as legitimate. Otherwise, you tell them al-Qawini and al-Kafi says such and such. He'll tell you that that's good for you. I don't accept al-Kafi, nor do I accept Bihar al-Anwar. Thus, al-hikmah is to bring sound proof and evidence and to appeal to the other person's mind and intellect. Not by resorting to things that don't make sense, to dreams. There are some, they base their arguments on dreams. There are some that base their arguments on fables and old stories that they heard from their grandmothers. This will not bring anyone to your school of thought. This will not bring anyone to the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt, nor to Islam. The Quran says, "Id'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah," with wisdom, with proof, with evidence. Some scholars have given another meaning to hikmah. Some say that hikmah means to say the right thing at the right moment. This has a very important effect. You have to say the right thing at the right moment to the right person as well. To the right person. Someone might come and ask me, prove to me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. I give him an answer. But I give him an answer according to what? According to his abilities. According to his intellectual capacity and ability. If a high school student or a high school student asks me about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, to prove to him that Allah exists, I give him the proof and evidence according to his capability. But if a PhD student, a person who's graduated and has a PhD also asks me, how do you prove that God exists? I give him the same argument? I give him the same proof? Of course not. That would be injustice. This is not hikmah. That wouldn't be wisdom. Because you give each person an answer according to his own capacity. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam states, نحن معاشر الأنبياء أمرنا أن نكلم الناس على قدر عقولهم. We prophets have been commanded to speak to people according to their intellectual capacity. That is why we see Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. A couple of people come to him at different times and they would ask the same exact question, but he would give one person one answer, but another person another answer. Why? Is the Imam contradicting himself? No, the Imam is not contradicting himself. The Imam sees that person, how much he knows, how much he understands, how much would he comprehend, and he would give him an answer appropriate for him. Another person comes with a different intellectual capacity, with a different background, he will give him an answer according to his capability, to his capacity. You see? Hikmah is to speak to people according to what they know and what they understand and what they comprehend. To speak to all people of all groups and of all ages and of all educational levels, to speak to them all on one level. This is not correct. This is not a good way of calling people to Allah. This is not hikmah. With some people you have to be patient. You have to speak in depth. When they ask a question, at times you have to be in depth. You're giving them an in-depth answer, detailed answer. With some, you give them one sentence, according to their capability. This is hikmah. This is what hikmah means. Sometimes you have to shout and argue and scream. At other times you have to speak softly and gently. This is hikmah. In Arabic we say لِكُلِّ مَقَامٍ مَقَالٍ. Every position requires a certain speech. Not all positions are the same, and not all people are the same. Thus, we have to realize this. We have to realize that it is part of wisdom at times to say something, and at times not to say something. I remember a couple of years back, I was at a community, and it was the month of Ramadan. An old lady, American, she came and she announced her shahadatain. She announced to be a Muslim. She said the shahadatain, and it was very touching. An old lady who has lived her entire life with Christianity, now she has abandoned Christianity because she came to see the truth and she accepted Islam. As soon as she converted to Islam, a man came to me and he said, Sayyid, tell her that she can no longer be with her husband. She has to abandon her husband because now she's a Muslim and her husband is a Christian and she can no longer be with him. Tell her now. I told him, calm down, for God's sake. This lady just converted to Islam. If we want to tell her that you have to abandon a husband that you've lived with for 40 years, she's going to say, you know what? Forget your Islam. Forget your Islam. I'm going to go back to my Christianity. Correct? I told him this is not wisdom. This is not wise right now to tell her. I didn't say anything. He went and he told her. He went and he told her, you have to abandon your husband tonight. From now on, you cannot approach your husband. Luckily, she already knew about this law and ruling. Otherwise, she would have left Islam. You see, wisdom is to know what to speak and how to speak and how to approach. What is your preaching style? This is all about wisdom, knowing what to speak and how to speak it and where and to whom. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة. Call people onto the path of your Lord with wisdom. And second, وَالْمَوْعِظَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ. And with good admonishment, with good advice. Meaning what? Meaning you speak gently. You speak softly. When the first failed, when he couldn't use wisdom because the other side, wisdom didn't work with him. Evidence, sound proof, and logic and reason didn't work with him or her or them. Then you use good admonishment, good words, soft words. You give good advice, kind advice, fatherly advice. Like when a son makes a mistake, his father calls him, seats him next to him gently and softly and speaks to him like the way a father speaks to his son. وَالْمَوْعِظَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ. You see, the Quran doesn't say speak roughly and harshly and curse and shout and swear. No, this is not al-maw'idha al-hasana. Let's learn from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Rasulullah had utmost akhlaq. The Quran says, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You have good high manners. The Quran says, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. If you were rough and aggressive and had bad manners, no one would have listened to you, Ya Rasulullah. People listen to you because you're humble. You're full of akhlaq. You have akhlaq and manners. People came to you. This is the reason that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was extremely successful in his da'wah, in his preaching. Because he had akhlaq. He knew how to preach. And so did the Ahlul Bayt. So did the Imams. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. There are so many examples. I'll give you one. There was a man, one of the companions of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, one of the Shia, one of the so-called Shia. He would go to the oppressors, to the tyrants of his time, to the rulers, and he would be part of them. He would be part of their entourage and group. But he was a so-called Shia. One day Imam Sadiq called him, told him, come here, I want to tell you something. He told him, listen, he wanted to teach him a lesson, correct? He wanted to teach him, but look at how he teaches him. He told him, Al-Hasan min kulli ahad hasan wa minka ahsan liqurbika minna. Good deeds are good from everyone, but from you they're even better. Why? Because you're close to us, Ahlul Bayt. When you do a good deed, it becomes even better. Because people will say, he learned this from whom? From Imam al-Sadiq. He learned this from the Ahlul Bayt. He learned this from the Imams. It becomes a better deed. وَالْقَبِيحِ مِنْ كُلِّ أَحَدْ قَبِيحِ وَمِنْكَ أَقْبَحِ لِقُرْبِكَ مِنَّا. And bad deeds are bad from everyone, but they are from you, they are worse. They are uglier. Why? Because you're closer to us. People will say, look, this is the companion of Imam al-Sadiq. This is the follower of Imam al-Sadiq. You see, Imam al-Sadiq teaches us a very good lesson. That when we, his followers, when we do a good deed or a bad deed, it counts twice. If we do a good deed, it counts twice. Why? When you do a good deed, it counts for you. And because you give a good name for the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt. On the street, outside, when you pick up a piece of trash and you throw it in the trash, this is a good deed. It goes good for you and it goes good for your faith, for your religion. And when you do a bad deed, it's not just one bad deed, it's twice. One bad for you and one bad for your religion, for your faith. When you speed on the street, when you pass a red light, when you almost crash into someone and everyone sees you, this isn't just bad for you, this is bad for your faith as well. These are two wrongs. When you lie to the government, there are some in some countries, they go and they lie to the government just to get financial aid and medical aid. There are some that go and they pretend they have disabilities, physical disabilities. They pretend that I don't know what, just so that the government gives them extra money. There's some. And they think that they don't get caught, they get caught. This is a bad deed twice, doubled. Bad for them and bad for their faith, bad for their religion. You see how Imam Sadiq alayhi salam gives a good advice, such a beautiful advice. He didn't yell, he didn't shout. Today we see people that think they could only get their point across by yelling and shouting and cursing, by using foul language. Who did we learn this from? Who did we learn this from? Imam Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam says, أَكْرَهُ لَكُمْ أَن تَكُونُوا قَوْمًا سَبَّابِينَ. I hate for you to be a group of people that curse, that use foul language. Today we have a group of people that curse, they shout. And this has become a phenomenon. And they have supporters and followers everywhere, and people on social networks. I see even youth on social networks that curse those who disagree with them. The Quran says, وَلَا تَسَبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. And do not curse those who worship other than Allah. Why? فَيَسُبُّ اللَّهَ عَدْوًا وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَسُبُّ اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Do not curse those who do not worship Allah. Why? Because they will also do what? They will also curse Allah. You curse their gods, they will curse your God. You curse their religious figures, they will curse your religious figures. You curse their scholars, they will curse your scholars. That's how it works. وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. And debate them for that which is good, for a good objective, for the greater good. This is the third resort. If wisdom didn't work and good admonishment didn't work, then the Quran says, debate them, dialogue them, have a dialogue, have a debate, but make sure that it's meaningful. Make sure that it's useful, that it doesn't get out of hand. وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. As long as the debate will reach a conclusion that you might have an influence on them, debate them. But if it doesn't, it only gets you to scream and shout and fight and argue, then no. Now, صلى على محمد وعلى محمد. These are the main ways of preaching, the main styles of preaching in the Quran. Wisdom, good admonishment, and good debates, beneficial debates. Then we see that the Quran gives us examples. There's so many examples in the Quran of how to preach, which sort of style. The Quran tells us with many examples, many stories, that if you want to speak, if you want to preach, if you want to call people to your school of thought, this is the way. These are the ways. These are the things that you should say. These are the things that you should say. And unfortunately today we see that there are some that have abandoned the Quran. They have abandoned the Quran's preaching styles. Why? The Quran tells us to preach and tells us how to preach, which styles to use. For example, the Quran tells us, speaks to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The Quran says, قُلْ وَإِنَّا أَوْ إِيَّاكُمْ لَعَلَى هُدًى أَوْ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. The Quran says, say Ya Rasul, tell whom? The non-believers, Christians, Jews, pagans, idol worshippers. Tell them that either I'm right or you're right. When you debate them, when you argue with them, tell them I could be right and I could be wrong. And you could be right and you could be wrong as well. You see, the Quran tells Rasulullah, don't tell them that I am right and you're wrong and that's it. Leave room for debate. Leave room for debate. Tell them, come, let's argue. Let's debate. Either I convince you of my opinion or you convince me. This is one of the ways of preaching. You don't come and tell them that, listen, you're going to hell and whoever you follow is going to hell and you're doomed no matter what and you better listen to me. This is not the style of the Quran. This is not a way of preaching in the Quran. The Quran says leave room for debate. Tell them that either وَإِنَّا أَوْ إِيَّاكُمْ لَعَلَى هُدًى أَوْ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. Either I'm right or you're right. Let's come sit down together peacefully and debate. Either I will convince you or you will convince me. Al-Shafi'i, the well-known Sunni scholar who's one of the 4 Sunni Imams. Al-Shafi'i, by the way, had a lot of love for Ahlul Bayt. He had a lot of love for Ahlul Bayt. Even though unfortunately he did not follow them, yet he loved them. يا آل بيت رسول الله حبكم فرض من الله في القرآن أنزله كفاكم من عظيم الشأن أنكم من لم يصلي عليكم لا صلاة له. He speaks about the Ahlul Bayt, that you have a great status, that you have a great position in Islam, to the point that he who doesn't send his peace and blessings upon you in salah, everyone, even Wahhabis, even ISIS, even Daesh, when they pray they have to send their peace and blessings upon Rasulullah and his family. Otherwise their salah would not be accepted. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Al-Shafi'i has a beautiful saying. He says, my opinion is right, but it could be wrong. But it could be wrong. And the other's opinion, it's wrong, but it could be right. You see, he leaves that room. He leaves that room that I'm right, but at the end of the day, I could be wrong because I'm human. I'm infallible. On the other side, they seem to be wrong, but they could also be right. This is one of the beautiful ways of calling people to Islam. Don't condemn them. Don't condemn them right away and tell them that your place is in hellfire and that you're wrong. No. Another example that we see in the Quran, beautiful way. The Quran says, tell them, Ya Rasulullah, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَعِظُكُمْ بِوَاحِدَةٍ أَن تَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ مَثْنَى وَفُرَادًا ثُمَّ تَتَفَكَّرُوا مَا بِصَاحِبِكُم مِّن جُنَّةٍ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا نَذِيرٌ لَكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Rasulullah, He says, tell them this. Tell your opponents, tell your enemies, those that do not believe in you, those that call you insane. Those that call you insane, tell them, as a way of preaching, tell them to think. Just think about what I had to say. But by themselves, individually. Tell them, Ya Rasulullah, go back home and think individually, not together. Not together. I will say why. Go back home and think individually. All you have to do is think, am I really insane? this Quran that I brought to you, this eloquence, this masterpiece, can an insane person bring this to you? Just think. All you have to do is think. You see, the Quran doesn't tell them that, refute them, tell them I'm not insane, curse them for calling you insane, tell them that they are insane. No. The Quran says, tell them, Ya Rasulullah, to go home and think. That's all they have to do, is just to sit and ponder. Just to sit and think by themselves. Why does the Quran say by themselves? أن تقوموا لله مثنى وفرادا. Go and think individually. You know why? Because we as human beings, we think better on an individual basis. When I think at home by myself, I think more objectively, unbiasedly. But when people gather together and they try to think together, they reach bad conclusions. Why? Because people, when they're in groups, emotions control them, not logic, not reason. When humans think individually, by themselves, they think intellectually, objectively. But when humans gather all together, they can't think objectively, they think emotionally. Proof of that. Have you seen riots and protests? Have you seen when some riots, they start breaking cars and breaking stores and vandalizing? Why? Because they're all together. When they're all together, emotions take control over them. Would someone by himself vandalize and break? No. Because when he's by himself, he thinks rationally, reasonably. But when people think together, it takes control of them. In Saqifa, what happened? Biggest proof that people, when they're together, they don't think rationally. At Saqifa, the people of Saqifa gathered to elect someone from the Ansar. From the people of Medina. 3 men. And you know who those 3 men were. They came at Saqifa. Within an hour, they got all of the Ansar, the people of Medina, to give allegiance to one of the Muhajirin, one of Quraysh. And we all know who it is. Within 1 hour. Why? Because they didn't think logically. They thought emotionally. The Quran says, think individually. Don't think in groups. When you think individually, you will think better. In Arabic, this is called al-aql al-jam'i. In English, they call this mob theory, mob thinking. Gangs. Why is it that gangs, they perform crimes together? While that person, if he's by himself, he wouldn't do it. Because when he's by himself, he'll think again. But when he's in a gang, when they're all together, they don't think. Emotions take over them. The Quran says, think individually. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Among the styles of preaching in the Quran, very beautiful. The Quran says, Ya Rasulullah, tell the people of the book, tell them, let's come together and let's worship one God, and let's agree that we will not worship anyone other than Allah, anyone other than God. What is this verse trying to say? You see? قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَىٰ كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ أَلَّا نَعْبُدَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا. Tell the people of the book, come for a common ground, for a common basis, something that we all have in common, that we will worship none other than Allah. You see, the Quran is telling the Rasulullah that when you want to debate, when you want to preach with someone, start first with what you have in common. What you have in common. When you have an argument with someone, tell them, okay, let's sit. This is what we agree on. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 10 things that we agree on, but there's only 2 things that we disagree on. These 2 things, let's sort it out. You see, there are others, instead of beginning with what they have in common with others, they begin with what they have, indifference, what they disagree with others. Instead of concentrating on what we have in common, they concentrate on that which we disagree on. And they try to convince the other side by beginning with what they disagree on. This is not the right approach. This is not the Quranic approach. The Quran says if you want to convince the other side, first show him what you have in common. So that he doesn't think you're weird, you're strange, you're a foreigner. You have certain beliefs. You have other beliefs. There's some Shia. We followers of Ahlul Bayt, we are already accused of being foreigners. We are accused of having our own Quran. Correct? They accuse us of having our own Quran. They accuse us of having our own beliefs. They accuse us of believing that the Prophet should have been Ali ibn Abi Talib, but Jibreel made a mistake and he went to Rasulullah. There's so many things that they accuse us of. In fact, in some countries, I've heard that in Morocco and in some countries, they accuse Shia of having tails. Tails. Like animals, tails. They accuse Shia of having tails. I know there are some Shia friends that are from some countries. They have Sunni friends, they came and told them, can you show us your tail? He told him, sure. Wait on a full moon when I turn into a werewolf and then I'll show you my tail. There's already, people fear us. People already think that we're weird and strange. Why do we make it worse? By throwing bombs. By telling them, such and such, the wife of Rasulullah did this companion did that. And no, let's concentrate on what we have in common instead of concentrating on that which we disagree on. This is the style of the Quran. This is what the Quran teaches us. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And finally, the Quran tells us that when you preach, when you speak to others, speak softly. Speak gently. Don't be so harsh. Don't be so aggressive. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends Musa and Harun to Fir'aun, what does he say? How does he send them? He says, اذهبا إلى فرعون إنه طغى فقولا له قولا لينا لعله يتذكر أو يخشى. Go to Fir'aun because he has become a tyrant. But when you speak to him softly, gently. Don't be aggressive. Don't curse him. Don't curse his mom or his dad or his cousin or his aunt or uncle. No, speak to him gently, softly, mercifully. Don't be harsh. Don't be aggressive. This is what the Quran teaches us. You see, isn't there so much that we have to learn from the Quran? We are trying to promote this Quran, correct? We are trying to get people to accept the Quran and the content of the Quran, whether it's with outsiders, people outside of Islam, or people within Islam. We're promoting the teachings of the Quran, and the Ahlul Bayt are part of the teachings of the Quran. Why don't we take the styles of preaching of the Quran and try to implement them? Let's learn from Abu Abdullah and Husain alayhi salam. You see, Imam Hussein on the day of Ashura, he tried till the last moment before fighting, before giving his life. He tried. He appealed to their intellect and he appealed to their hearts. He appealed to their intellect on the day of Ashura. He stood and he said, Insubuni man ana. Look at me. Who am I? Do you know who you're fighting? ثم انظروا هل يحل لكم قتلي. First, look at who I am, and then decide that is it allowed for you to fight me and spill my blood and show my blood? أليس جدي رسول الله? Is it my grandfather Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? أليست فاطمة أمي? Is it Fatima Zahra, my mother? أليس حمزة عمي? Is it Hamza, my uncle? Of course, he doesn't say, is it Ali ibn Abi Talib, my father? Why didn't he mention the name of Ali ibn Abi Talib? Because the enemy had hatred for Ali ibn Abi Talib. In fact, that is the reason why they killed Ali ibn Abi Talib. That is the reason why they killed Imam Hussein. Because his father was Ali ibn Abi Talib. He tells them, think logically. Think logically. Look at who I am. I'm the grandson of your prophet. And you wish to fight me? And who's the other person that you're obeying? You give your obedience to? Yazid, the son of Muawiyah, the son of Abu Sufyan, the son of Hind. Think logically. He appealed to their intellect, and he also appealed to their hearts. He gave them good admonishment on the day of Ashura in the middle of the battlefield. His last moments, his final moments. He said, Ya ala Abi Sufyan, إن لم يكن لكم دين وكنتم لا تخافون المعاد فكونوا أحرارا في دنياكم. O the followers of Abu Sufyan, if you have no faith, if you don't believe in Islam, and if you do not believe in the day of judgment and in resurrection, at least be free men, do not be slaves of Yazid. Do not be slaves of Ibn Ziyad, be free men. You see, he appealed to their minds and to their hearts. Who doesn't wish to be free? Who wishes to be a slave? This was the style of preaching of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He stood and he said, ألا وإن الدعي ابن الدعي قد ركز بين اثنتين بين السلة والذلة وهيهات من الذلة. Ibn Ziyad was called al-Da'i ibn al-Da'i, meaning he didn't have a father. Ibn Ziyad, no one knew who his father was. That is why some call him Ibn Marjana. They call him with the name of his mother, because his father, no one knew who his father was. And Ziyad, who some ascribe him to Ziyad, no one knows who his father was. This is called al-Da'i ibn al-Da'i. This man, Imam Hussein says, he has given me two choices, either the sword or humility, and by God, I will never choose humility. وَحِيهَاتْ مِنَّ الذِّلَّةِ. You see, he was appealing to people's sense of freedom, sense of justice, sense of peace. Yet who listened to him? They gathered around him and they killed his family members and companions. They killed them one by one, including his baby infant. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he had several farewells on the day of Ashura. He rode his turban and he wore his armor and he grabbed his sword and he was about to enter the battlefield. His sister Zainab comes to him and she says, Ya Aba Abdullah, your infant son Abdullah can barely open his eyes. Take him to the enemy camp, perhaps they might have a broken heart and give him. Imam Hussein alayhi salam brought down his shield, he brought down his sword, and he carried Ali al-Asghar to the enemy soldiers without a weapon. You know why? He was telling them, I've come without a weapon, I don't wish to fight you, have mercy on me and have mercy on this child. He came to them, he told them, if I have committed a sin, if I have committed a crime, which sin and crime has this child? What sin has this child committed? Harmala says that on the day of Ashura, I threw 3 arrows. One of the arrows landed in the eye of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. Another arrow landed in the chest of Husain. But it was the 3rd arrow that broke my heart, that brought tears to my eyes. It was the arrow that landed in the neck of Abdullah. Umar bin Sa'd saw that the group, his soldiers had gathered, they had huddled. Some said, let's give him water. Others said, no, let's not give him water. Umar bin Sa'd told Harmala, اقطع نزاع القوم. There's no room for discussion. Harmala said, what should I do? He said, look at the white part of the neck of this infant. Harmala says that I saw the white part of the neck of the infant. I shot an arrow. It came from one side and it came out from the other. Abdullah al-Radi' took out his hands. He looked at his father as if saying, look at them, my father. You brought me to quench my thirst. but look at what they've done to me. Imam Hussein held the blood in his hand. He threw it to the sky. Imam al-Baqir says that by God, not a single drop of blood came back to the ground. Imam Hussein came back. He brought Abdullah. He buried Abdullah behind the tent. Now it was time for Imam Hussein to enter the battlefield. He wore his armor. He wore his turban. He grabbed his sword. He said, "Man dha yuqaddimu li jawadi?" Who will bring me my horse? His sister Zainab brought him his horse. And she said, وَأَيُّ أُخْتٍ تُقَدِّمُ لِأَخِيهَا جَوَادَ الْمَنِيَّةِ? Which sister brings to her brother the horse of death? Imam Hussein rode his horse. They all gathered around him. He began to say, يا زينب ويا رقية ويا أم كلثوم ويا رباب عليكن مني السلام فهذا آخر الاجتماع الوداع الوداع. Oh Zainab, oh Ruqayya, oh Kulthum, farewell on you. This is the last time we meet. The next time we shall meet will be in paradise. They all gathered. One of them held his head, another held his feet. They began to beg him, "Our master, do not leave us. Our master, do not go." Imam Hussein was entering the battlefield. He's about to go. All of a sudden, he heard a faint voice from behind him. He listened to the voice. The voice was saying, "Mahlan, Mahla, Yabna Zahra." Oh, the son of Zahra, don't rush, don't go. He looked and it was his sister Zainab. He looked back, she told him, "Akhi Aba Abdullah, I just have one request, one final request. Anzil min ala dhahri jawadik. Come down from your horse, my dear brother." Zainab approached her brother. She approached Imam Hussein. "Akhi Aba Abdullah, ikshif li an sadrika wa an nahrik." My dear brother Aba Abdullah, expose your chest and expose your neck. He exposed his chest and neck. She came to him and she embraced his chest and she embraced his neck and she turned towards Medina. She said, "My dear mother Fatima, I did exactly like you said." Imam Hussein told her, "My dear Zainab, you're breaking my heart. Why did you mention our mother Fatima?" She said it when it was her last day in this life. She told me, "My dear daughter Zainab, you will see your brother Hussein on a very lonely day, without any companions, without soldiers. On that day, embrace him on his chest, embrace him on his neck, and tell him that this is from his mother Fatima." Imam Hussein enters the battle. He begins to fight. He fights fearlessly. They all disperse. He fights. They throw him with arrows. They throw him with rocks. A rock lands on the forehead of Aba Abdullah. They throw him with arrows. An arrow lands in the chest of Aba Abdullah. The Imam comes down from his horse. The arrow lands in his heart. His heart begins to bleed. He holds the blood in his hand and he stains his head and forehead with his blood. And he says, "This is how I wish to meet my Lord." He falls to the ground. The enemy soldiers start approaching him. Shamr ibn al-Jawshan begins to approach him. His horse starts circulating around the Imam, as if telling him, "Get up, Ya Aba Abdullah, they are coming to you." The horse drenches his face in the blood of Imam Hussein. He keeps on roaming around the Imam, as if telling him, "Get up, Ya Aba Abdullah, the enemies are getting closer." When the horse gave up on the Imam, the horse goes to the tent of a Sayyidah Zainab. They thought that the Imam had come back. They leave the tent and they see that the horse is empty. The Imam is not on the horse. As Sayyidah Zainab comes, she stands on the hill and she sees Shimr ibn al-Jawshan approaching her brother Hussein. أين المنادي وإماما وسيدا ومظلوما لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. نسألك اللهم وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله. اللهم لا تدع لنا ذنبا إلا غفرته، ولا هما إلا فرجته، ولا عيبا إلا سترته، ولا خوفا إلا آمنته، ولا رزقا إلا بسطته، ولا شملا إلا جمعته، ولا مرضا إلا شفيته، ولا غائبا إلا حفظته وأدنيته، ولا حاجة من حوائج الدنيا والآخرة لك فيها رضا ولنا فيها صلاح لا قضيتها ويسرتها يا أرحم الراحمين. ولأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات نقرأ سورة الفاتحة مع